Hello, everyone. Julia and I are members of FORRT's team Pedagogies, which aims to collect and catalog exemplary instances of successful pedagogies in teaching or mentoring of open and reproducible principles. We are delighted to be here today with Gilad Feldman, who has done an amazing job in incorporating open science principles into his teaching and mentoring. Thank you, Gilad, for being here today and for the opportunity. We have collected some questions for you from the FORRT community, but also from the academic community on Twitter. And we would like to ask these questions to you today to learn more about your process and your insights about incorporating open science into your teaching and mentoring. And given that you have done so many teaching and mentoring activities involving open science, we have divided these questions into general questions, and we will then move on to some more specific questions about some of your educational resources, if that is okay.
Yes, definitely.
Perfect. So we would like to start with the following question. So many of us know that you have like an incredible amount of open science resources that range from courses and replications to incentives to other researchers to replicate or find mistakes on your own work. So maybe you could start by sharing with us a little bit of how did you embark on this open science journey?
Yeah, happy to. So I got the questions in advance and I made some slides. And these slides are slides that I give in workshops on this topic. So I'll skip through a few and then we have this, how did I embark on the open science journey? And I have a lot to say about this, but I'll just go like chronologically on how this happened with me. So already 2015, the big science paper came out with the open science collaboration, showing replication rates that I found to be somewhat alarming from top journals in our fields with some very reputable labs. And in the things that we are able to replicate, the replication rate is about 30 to 50%. And in those, the effect sizes are about half of what was originally published. And I remember being in my postdoc, a year after finishing my PhD, 2014, seeing the science paper come out. And already we knew about BEM 2011, feeling the future, questionable research practices, false positive psychology. But we didn't have a good understanding of how bad things are until these mass replication efforts came out. And then I'm a postdoc and I'm thinking something big is happening and we really need to pay attention to this. So I cannot, in good faith, continue with what I was doing without really sorting this out. A few other things happened with Kahneman, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning psychologist in judgment decision making and the social priming literature. So a bunch of calls. And I was trying to sort out what should I invest my time in? How should I make sense of this? So I decided to put everything that I do aside and contemplate my future career. And I decided that no more of what I've been doing during my PhD, no more of the directions that I started in my first year of postdoc. I'm going to put this all aside and just think about my principles. So that's, I think, a privilege that I had in my postdoc. Not many people get this. And I decided that it's very important to me that my research is trustworthy, reproducible, replicable. And over time, I also got to understand some of the equity and inclusion issues. Being in Maastricht in the Netherlands also helped me somewhat after years in Hong Kong and the US. So I decided that we need a community for this. If I'm going to do 1-2 papers a year on this, I will not be able to figure this out. So it does require a community. And I just took from many other people around me. So an hour away, I had Daniel Atkins, many others in Tilburg and University of Amsterdam. I just visited as many labs as I could around in that area in order to understand what are they doing, what are they talking about, and set my own principles. So the first ones, like the most obvious ones, are full transparency to share all the materials, the data, and the code. It might seem obvious today, but back in 2016, this was scary stuff because nobody else was doing this. And I came from the management literature, not even transitioning to social psychology, and nobody shares anything in management. So this was scary stuff. And at the beginning, some of my collaborators were pushing back a bit on this, asking me what I'm doing. And then a bunch of things that I didn't even know how to do, pre-registrations, how to do even power analysis, all sorts of things. But finally, I decided that seems like replications are something that's very important in order to sort this out, or at least for me to make sure that I know what I'm doing. So 2017, I got my first master's students. They asked me to guide master's thesis students. And I realized that I'm going to deviate from the department's directions, and I'm only going to guide students on pre-registered replications and extensions and pre-registered meta-analysis. I had no idea how to do either one of those. A little bit of experience with meta-analysis, but definitely no pre-registrations, never done a replication. And when I tried to do this with the students, the three brave souls joined me to try and sort this thing out, but we all kind of learned this thing together. And I remember in 2017, I asked Lucas, who was one of the first to join me, so what is this replication? Is anybody going to care about this? And I said, I have no idea. Let's just post this on ResearchGate and see what happens. So as you can see here, we posted this in around February, and then a month later, we get an incoming editor in Cognition and Emotion saying that they're looking for people to submit replications. And Lucas was very thrilled about this. It's like, oh my God, people care. I'm like, hold on, there's a long way to go from doing a replication to things actually working successfully and being published. But to our great surprise, Lucas made this happen. So finally we understood, and even in Cognition and Emotion, I'm like, so there is interest in this work. Things are changing in the field. This is stuff that we can actually do with master students. So this whole model kind of like started building in my head on how we should do this. And then my dilemma after the postdoc, as I started my tenure track, University of Hong Kong, is that I want to do as many of these as possible. I want to involve as many students as possible, as many early career researchers as possible. I want to maximize impact and minimize errors. So I just started this core team model where we integrate education and research. So these two kind of go hand in hand. I want to focus on students. So going as early as undergraduates, embedding this in everything that I do in the courses. So I revamped everything in the courses that I started, and focusing on impactful classics, mapping them one by one, and then just trying to implement best practices. So if I demand this of my students, then it means that I also demand this of myself. I need to set high standards, and then I can learn from the students, because very early on, like with Lucas and the students that I followed, they brought in new practices. They suggested all sorts of directions. So this is how I forced myself to learn open science. And then year by year, semester by semester, just trying to scale this up and get to the scale that it is right now. So that's how core team happened. This kind of took a life of its own, and now it became this large team collaboration from around the world. I never expected things to grow this fast and this successful, but I used this paradigm, the core model, the revamping of my courses, my guided thesis work with undergraduates and masters in order to build this. And it almost everything that I tried worked out brilliantly. So it's step by step building this as a process, and then learning from each step, and then implementing this for the next.
Thank you. Well, this is really impressive. You have managed to put open science at the core of your teaching and research. So if we move now to the next question in your slide as well, could you briefly mention the materials and the activities that you have developed in your own work to accelerate open science?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I have to be honest, I did not develop this definitely not on my own. I understood very early on that if it depends on me to develop the resources for my students and my collaborators, we're not going to make much progress, because academics are overburdened. So we need to open this thing up. So I decided every time I'm going to do a guide or a template, I'm going to make this collaborative. So it's going to be on a Google Doc. Anybody can come in and contribute. Anybody can edit. And then if they put their name and what they contributed, so it's a trust model, I assume that everybody that puts something in there is it's authentic and real. And once we submit this to a journal or we take this to the next step, and then they are co-authors. It could be a student, it could be all the way up to a full professor, but it's open. So anybody can come in, kind of like a Wikipedia sort of standard. So everybody is editing on top of each other. And we did a bunch of things. We did not only replications and extensions, but also research assessments and a lot of community resources over here. I'll just give you a sense of the kind of community resources that we needed to do. So one of the first challenges coming to University of Hong Kong is that everybody uses SPSS, which is horrific for so many different reasons. So took some convincing to shift HKU to Jamovi, to convince them. Back then it was still not very solid. Nobody really knew. The JASP team just separated from the Jamovi team, so kind of like a competition of sorts. So we needed a guide. So I just started to putting together some resources and made this collaborative guide. And now it's like this almost 100 pages long sort of guide. And then I also wanted to set higher standards. So Jamovi is a bridge to R and R Markdown. So with my guided thesis students, I was aiming for R. So that needed a guide as well. All the process of how to do pre-registered replications and extensions. So what is an extension? How do you do a replication? We have a guide for this as well, and updating this. Every step of the way, effect size calculation. How do you do confidence intervals? Nowadays, you've got amazing packages that just take care of everything. It's embedded in Jamovi. Back in 2017, 18, this was a challenge. So almost every one of these guides started from a real need. And as students were working on this, they would write comments saying, but we need this, this is missing, or they would actually help each other and answer each other's questions. So it's not just up to me to update this, and together with the teaching assistants and the students and the external reviewers that we had and the entire core team. And I would go on Twitter and I would advertise this. People would come in and these guides would grow, exponential growth. It's just amazing how many of these guides are out there. And now everybody can just take what it is that we've done and implement this in their own. So I just decided I'm just going to open up everything. So students coming into my courses know that everything that they do is going to be shared. And there's a bit of a gap to overcome because this scares students, especially undergraduate students. This is a scary notion. When you put stuff on Google Docs and then let's say, for example, the original author who you replicate comes into your Google Doc and gives you comment, this is intimidating stuff. So it takes a couple of weeks for me to reassure them that this works. And we've proven this now for over 4 years that this model is working. So for almost everything that I do in my courses, we have a guide, a template, and we definitely have a lot of examples from real stuff that the students have done. So every time I see a need, I immediately open a collaborative guide. I invite people in the Twitter community. I let the students work on this. And then from the comments, from the reactions, from the questions on the Google Doc or on Slack, I just add content over time. And with the community, this grows. At the end, if some of them we are submitting to journals, so then I invite early career researchers to take the lead. So they clean this up, they verify the links, they make sure that everything flows, and then we submit this as a collaborative team resource.
Fascinating. You took a very nice and sharp turn in your research, and it's a very nice model for other people to follow on as well. I think you already mentioned some of the challenges, right? Like with the convincing some students can be intimidating. Also, the lack of supporting materials when you started. But were there any other challenges or critical incidents that you would like to mention when incorporating open science into your teaching or research? And what would you say that scholars embarking on this open science journey can expect?
Yeah, so I've had quite the journey. Things are simpler now than they used to be. At the beginning, there were lots of challenges, issues coming up, quite a few frustrations that I needed to deal with. And I give some talks about this and share all of that. But I think the important point is that we're able to overcome many of those. Not everything works and not everything has been solved, but we are making progress. I've learned a lot about myself, about the community, about open science. It's interesting because I think psychologists just assume that they're studying other people and they're studying lay beliefs, but rarely do we point the research that we're doing onto ourselves. So I study judgment decision making, cognitive heuristics, and biases. And it's amazing how many of these biases we actually experience ourselves in the academic community and in the scientific process. So whenever I study something, for example, self-interest is overestimated, is one thing that we actually replicated and published. So there's a lot of assumptions of how open science folks versus the more traditional status quo researchers look at each other, replicators and original authors. So we all have a lot of assumptions on the other side. So this is a slide about replicators, and this is a slide about open science versus the status quo. So like looking at each other and blaming, and if you're on Twitter, then and you haven't muted the right keywords, then you're definitely gonna be exposed to all of that. I try to shield my team and my students as much as possible from it, but I want them to have a realistic view of what the academic world is. And some of it has a lot of ego and interest and cognitive biases and heuristics. Um, and I think if you're not in the open science community or you're not a replicator, if you submit something to a journal as an author, or if you've ever reviewed something, you see this kind of assumptions that people have towards each other. And the thing that I try to tell my students is that at the end, we all want the same thing. So the science world is all of us working together. So we need to overcome some of these biases. So for example, the self-interest is overestimated is a key one where we just need to like assume best interest. We need to debias ourselves. We need a lot of humility, patience. It's sometimes difficult to stay positive. Like I see some of the Twitter stuff, and I don't really understand why it escalates so fast. But at least you know, sometimes I even get dragged into some of this. My initial reaction when I get a hostile review from an original author is, you know, rage to the point like, oh, how can they do this to my students, and what's going to happen with my collaborators? But you know, after a day or two of calming down and then just thinking about this, and at the end, it's like they're not doing this to hurt me. At the end, we all want the same thing. We just need to find ways for us to debias, and there are ways to overcome this. So I'm very positive about register reports and adversarial collaborations, and now we know how to disclose our conflicts of interest and how to guard ourselves. So lots of challenges. We're human, we have weaknesses, but I think we're learning as a community how to discuss this in the open, how to overcome this together. I think really I put humility down twice in this slide because I think it's needed. All of us now suddenly in the last 2 years, suddenly I'm realizing that in my team I'm like the senior, so I need to be very careful. And sometimes I catch myself like with a student or somebody who has less experience comes to me and suggests something, and I need to stop myself from like immediately saying what my position is, because sometimes what they are saying is important and can really change my mind. So taking a step back, listening, you know, knowing your place and knowing that you have a lot to learn. So just adopting these principles can help overcome some of these challenges. But I face these challenges on a regular basis, almost on a weekly basis. I'm used to it. I just try to get the other early career researchers and students to kind of used to this and to know how to deal with this better.
Thanks a lot. So let's now turn perhaps to some more material specifics, specific questions. You have an amazing teaching portfolio, and you detail all of your activities together with a teaching philosophy and your goals. So could you tell us what you think are the key elements of your teaching philosophy?
So just like when I joined the HKU and got the courses that I need to teach, I kind of try to set the principles for the teaching direction. So it's not only just like research that we need to revamp things, but also definitely in education. So one of the first dilemmas that I had to think about is I was given, this is the social psychology book. This is the judgment decision making book. Please teach this. And I was going through the book, and immediately became clear that I cannot teach this because actually I don't know what in there works or not. Some of the things I already know do not work very well. And I do know that we need to talk about other things. Like we really need to reorient what we do in education. And also believe in a slightly different system that I learned in Maastricht University, the problem-based learning education. Plus, I got a lot of inspiration from some various projects like the Psychological Science Accelerator and CREP that are terrific projects that are trying to involve students and early career researchers, as well as some of key articles that came out about teaching replications. And something that I strongly believe in, this headline in 2018, that students and early career researchers are the key to addressing the replication crisis in science. So based on that, trying to think what the model should be. So we need to move away from this model where a professor stands in front of the class with a PowerPoint saying the truth is ego depletion or power posing, social priming, and then the students sit in the back like listening and like nodding their heads. It's like, oh, this is the truth. The professor knows everything, so we should follow this. Instead of this, I try to adopt a different approach. So, for example, here, Adam Grant was like a thinker in organizational psychology that is talking about revamping the classroom, flipping in the classroom, rewriting the textbook. And humility here once again, but most focused on scientist mindset. So rather than teaching students knowledge that is not updated and we actually do not have faith in, we need to teach them how to learn. So it's about learning about how to learn. So we need to understand that uncertainty is natural, science is messy, and that students can really, while they're learning, also help inform science and bring back their knowledge and embed this within the academic community. So I love these ideas, and I tried as best I can to implement this, plus the problem-based learning sort of approach that you give problems to students and the students can sort this out. You don't need to tell them everything about the path. You just need to kind of give them a goal, make available resources, perhaps at the beginning, make sure that there is a good interaction and that they know what the general aim is or how the system works. But once they're on that path, I was blown away by what students are able to do with this project, problem-based learning, and the projects that they did in Maastricht University. And to my great surprise, this worked brilliantly in undergraduate courses in Hong Kong. So these are kind of the main principles that I tried. I improved every semester, but at the beginning, this is kind of like where I was going towards. I really wanted students to lead the process. I wanted them to go in. So it doesn't all rely on me. It's not like I have some better truth. There is no hierarchy. We are having a conversation and figuring things out together in a discussion. I learn together with them. We do hands-on, real, actual science that is impactful, that has the potential of being published and on par with some of the best work that's out there that's implementing latest best practices, latest tools and trends in psychological science and beyond. So pre-registration, power analysis, register reports, all of these things that are really revolutionizing science in the past few years. I wasn't really sure on how I'm able to do this, but of course it was very clear to me that I want to have complete transparency. So it's very difficult for educators to share. I don't know why, because we can save a lot of time for each other. And I just decided whatever I do, slides, lectures, past 2-3 years, pandemic, also the videos as we went to hybrid and Zoom. So as shy as I was 2-3 years ago, like 3 years ago, you would tell me share a video of yourself. I'm like, there's absolutely no way. but I forced myself, and after some time, I got a little bit better with this. But this is part of transparency. And also, students coming into my classes, I told them, we're going to share everything that you do, aside from your grade, everything that you do is going to be publicly shared on the Open Science Framework. And I think just this increases a little bit of tension and pressure, but also increases the sense of importance and accountability. And I really never had to worry about all sorts of ethical issues, because students understand how important this is. When everything is shared, everything is transparent, everybody is working together, everybody is building on one another. You have the burden of trying to do good work, and wanting to be as transparent as possible, that even if you have the possibility of an error, that you want to be transparent about the process of how you got there, so other people can help you do better and find your mistakes. So as best I can, this is kind of like what I implemented. And then there's all sorts of reasons of why I started from replications and extensions, just trying to do things more practical, measurable, in a systematic way, and making sure that it's instructive and that students find this to be valuable for them in their learning journey. And that I think their skills can be applied regardless of whether they go to academia or the industry, that they can implement this in their scientific thinking, in whatever it is that they decide to do afterwards. Yeah, so in the courses, everything is open, power of collaboration, everything is on Google Docs, lots of checks and balances with peer review. So we usually have two teams of two students working independently, and then they peer review each other, and then the TAs come in, and then I come in, and then external reviewers and the Twitter community, and then we share everything on the Open Science Framework. So many chances to find errors, improve on the work. Every time they submit, they're never graded on their first submission. They always have time and opportunity to get feedback, and only at the end of the course, when they revise, this is what's graded, so we can see the journey. And the bottom line is that I don't emphasize the outcome. I don't expect perfection. I just want to see that they've learned and how they evolved and developed over the semester. So, it's kind of an incremental structured process where we all work together in order to make sure that there is that learning happened and is taking place. Yeah. So all sorts of kind of tips that I added afterwards if somebody wants to look into this further.
That's really nice. Perhaps can we go back to collaboration for 1 minute? You mentioned the importance of learning how to learn, and the fact that you use hands-on experiences and your students collaborate. That's great. Collaboration is great, and that's one of the pillars of your pedagogy. But sometimes it's difficult, especially perhaps as an undergraduate. So in your syllabi, you mentioned that you use a team contract that is created together with the students. Perhaps you could give us a very quick example, or you could explain what this team contract is, and why team communication is so important to learn.
Yeah, so team contract is something relatively new that we started last year, and this is the second year that we're implementing this. And I can tell you that by far, team contracts have really boosted collaborative work, because I think the most important aspect of this is that they help align expectations. So students, especially at University of Hong Kong, do not like to work together. Many of them are also used to like multiple choice exams and things that are more structured. So they only depend on themselves. But I think there's something very important in teams and teamwork, that wherever you go afterwards in industry or whatever your job you're going to have after graduation, you're going to have to work with people. So overcoming challenges, knowing how to structure things so that you can maximize and arrive at some synergy between the members of the group, and disperse the workload, being able to complementary skills, bring those together in order to help one another. So It was a challenge. So one of the, if you read, I make all my teaching evaluations available online, so anybody can go and look at this. The first few years, like the most common complaint was we don't want to work in teams. Like we want to work individually. We don't understand why we need this. And when we try and work with a team, it just ends up being like one or two persons that are doing the most, and then some free riders. And as much as we try to do this, so I do midterm evaluations, and then I do kind of like the teaching assistants try and check with the teams how they're doing. But even that doesn't help address core issues in the team. Like there's nothing that external instructors and teaching assistants can help to facilitate this. And I think it just basically is getting the team to sit down together and talk about things. So now we talk, so we have this template for team contracts that helps the team walk through what it is that they need to talk about. So I'll just give one example. We ask the team to do something that is common in organizational psychology called the pre-mortem. So assume that something has gone wrong. So usually you do a post-mortem after the patient has died. Why has the patient died? But medical teams sometimes do a simulation of just assume that something has happened. How can you address this in advance? So before something happened, and prepare for this, so that you know that if there are signs that this is happening, how you would address this. And now they have a bunch of examples. So every year they can look at the team contracts from previous years, and the teaching assistants give some feedback, and then they can implement this. So the pre-mortems become more and more complex, more and more detailed. We don't want this to become a true contract. It does need to leave some room for flexibility, and we don't want others to be held, why didn't you do 1A3? We want them to just be able to detail things so that they have this in mind and that they can adjust during the semester. And at the end of the semester, we ask them to do a team report where they actually reflect on what did they do compared to what it is that they planned. And at the team, actually, last year, it really worked brilliantly. I never imagined that this would work as successful as it did. But actually, I asked them to grade themselves. So I asked them, what do you think is the grade that you deserve? So this was your plan. This was the performance. This is what you did. This is how you coped. This was your learning process. What do you think you deserve? And the students got what they thought, and they were very humble and clear about this, because they were able to see by themselves that this is about their own learning journey. It's not about me telling them you have to learn this way. It's about them setting their own goals, them holding themselves accountable, them overcoming challenges, and them reflecting on the journey so that they can improve for the next team project. So I think team contracts are just brilliant. I think this is also important for, let's say, if you have a collaborative project, even FORRT or psychological science accelerator. And I think it really helps if you get the team to talk about things in advance at the beginning to try and overcome this. So we have, at least for core, fairly detailed, like 30 something pages where I tell people what are the expectations and what happens in each and every step. So for example, if I work with students and early career researchers, some of them just like things don't work out. They don't progress for a PhD. Pandemic happened, lots of unfortunate things. So all this is okay, understandable. Just need to prepare for this. So every time something like this happened, I updated this contract. So everybody that comes in, they know this is what's expected. So there are no surprises. So that's kind of like how team contracts are. It's not a legal contract, but it is something to kind of align expectations and get the team to try and understand each other a bit better.
And I'm sure it increases self-awareness and the reflections of the students towards self-assessment, and that's not easy to do. About your redesign process, how did you redesign your courses to include these principles very quickly?
Yeah, I just in at the University of Hong Kong, I'm very privileged that I don't have to. There's not a lot of oversight. I have a lot of freedom and flexibility. I just decided that this is what I'm going to do. So, and at the beginning, I didn't even have to do a lot of like, I just told the students, this is what I am aiming for, and I'll complete the syllabus during the semester. So I keep updating the syllabus. It's a live kind of document. So it's not a big problem to align this in my own courses. I just try things out. Whenever I see a good idea, I try to embed this. Wherever something on Twitter seems like it's gonna work, I'm ready to try this. And the students are open-minded enough to let me do this and evolve together with me.
Sounds really great. I think now we would like to move a little bit to the mass replications and extensions, which is like one of the amazing initiatives that you have done over the past years with your students. And I think when we put this also on Twitter, there was a lot of curiosity of how this is actually implemented, right? And I know you talked a lot about this in other talks as well, but could you walk us through how it works, like from the beginning to the end, in terms of administrative or organizational stuff that you have to do and pay attention to? How many students are involved in these classes and in each replication? How do you motivate the students? I think you already touched upon on this as well, but what is it that you do to motivate the students to participate in replication?
Yeah, so this is complex. Lots I can say about this. I gave workshops up to like 3 hours talking about this. In terms of numbers, so you can see the numbers of the students that took part. So some of the courses that I teach are very large, like fundamentals of social psychology, 70, not very large, but larger than 70 students per class. But then more recently, it's the more advanced courses, advanced social psychology, judgment decision making, around 20. So sometimes it goes up, it goes down, pandemic related, all sorts of things. And then there's the guided thesis students over here on the right. So we do two types of projects. At the beginning, we did the one on the left over here, which is completed pre-registered replications and extensions. So within one semester, some of the students have never, maybe even ran a t-test. They very basic skills coming in second year undergraduate. They don't know anything about experimental design, definitely not much about the literature. But within one semester, in a very structured kind of way, we take them through from nothing to a completed manuscript that is ready to be submitted to a journal with data collection, pre-registration, analysis, everything written up. More recently, in the last 2 years, we moved to a model of, I think, 3 years. In the last, since 2020, we moved to a model of registered report stage 1. So increasingly, I understood that registered reports are the way to go. Also, in a lot of rejection letters from journals telling us about all the issues that were in there based on outcome bias and hindsight bias. So I decided, okay, this is something that registered reports really tackle very well. So you get in principle acceptance over an agreed pre-registration. So I got the students instead to write stage 1 reports, where instead of real data, we simulate data sets. Qualtrics has this really nice thing where after you do the survey design, you press how many participants do you want to create, and it creates that for you. And then the students run the data analysis on this random noise, which helps catch a lot of problems. But it's simulated as if it's a real manuscript. So as far as the students are concerned, it's a regular manuscript. It doesn't have a discussion because the results are random, but it has a very detailed methods and results section based on the random data. This is basically how the workflow, what it looks like. So at the beginning, we have a Qualtrics survey, then they do a data analysis code based on the generated data set. We have a pre-registration report, and then because it's two teams working independently, they peer review one another. So they're working on exactly the same target, and then they know something about this target, and they've looked at this. So looking at a fresh point of view by another team really raises things both for them, and then they immediately are able to provide some feedback. Also go on the Twitter community every time that we have this and say, my students are doing this. Anybody want to come? And at the beginning, I thought it's going to be a shot in the dark and nobody is going to come. But sometimes we have like 3-4 people coming in, really looking into things, offering critique and feedback. And then they have a week to revise. So this is very tight schedule. We're doing this in like a month and a half. And then there's like used to be 2-3 weeks where I don't sleep very much. And then I do all the pre-veg on Open Science Framework, and I collect all the data, like 20 different data collections. And then finally, I give them the data sets, once again, 2 teams working independently, and then they peer review one another, and then the Twitter community and the TAs and me. Then finally, there's a revised final report, which is an APA style submission ready manuscript. And this is where I, again, go on Twitter and say, any early career researchers want to take lead on this? And what usually happens is that the model that we offer is that the lead is the first author. So this is an early career researcher with some research experience that verifies what the students have done, adds some different analysis that maybe are missing, and then makes sure that the introduction and the discussion kind of reflect on our humble and open science practices. And then followed by the students, followed by the TA, and then me trailing at the back, where the students and the early career researchers are first co-author in a note. So everybody gets credit, everything is written down. And this is how we're able to do this. Within 1 semester, the students do everything, and then I work with the early career researcher based on what the students have done to bring this to publication. We still have about 25 of those that are finished. So if anybody is interested in a FORRT community, can come and work with us. Very similar model, but without the data collection, because we submit the stage 1 pre-registration to the journal. So same model, but we also do a little bit of pre-testing. And finally, the early career researchers work with me as the lead authors on the registry report stage 1, and we submit this. The model for my thesis students is a little bit different, because starting from last year, all of the thesis students do a registry report with me during the 1 year that they have. So we submit everything to peer community in registry report, which is revolutionary because they offer peer review in 2 weeks. Before that, I was not able to do a registry reports with thesis students, but this really allows me. So we do multiple iterations, very, very similar. And with the thesis students, once we get in principle acceptance, then we immediately proceed to data collection. They finish their thesis, and then we work with the peer community in order to get this done. In terms of impact, you can see how this thing works. So just so when we understand what I was mentioning, so the early career researchers are like first author, and then followed by the underlined, which are all the students. So sometimes it's like a long list of students, especially if it was a fundamental of social psychology class where we have 70. So it's like teams of 5. And then followed by the teaching assistant, and then me at the end. And then we have the star, which is the shared co-authorship. But of course, everything is open and shared. So quite a bit of impact. And when the students see this, so the first 2 years, it was difficult to convince them. But once students see this, immediately what comes to their mind is like, oh, so I can put this on my CV. This is going to help me get hired. And it does. Now I know that it does. Like, it makes a real difference, not only if they go to academia, but also if they go to industry and they have a publication in a scientific article, a journal, and many of those are very reputable journals, and it makes a real difference in hiring. It shows that the student really knows their stuff. And peer community in registry reports is amazing, because already when you have an in-principle acceptance, you can put this on your CV and say, I got this guaranteed publications. Plus, you have a recommendation. So Chris Chambers goes in and writes, the student has done it, not a student, like this co-author has done such a remarkable job and has been peer reviewed, and here is all the open peer review. So a real revolution in science, this peer community. So thesis students are very enthusiastic about this right now, and this is a motivation for them. And in general, I think now enough evaluations from the last 3 years that students realize that if you're willing to put in the work and you're serious about this and you want to know science, then there's a lot that you can work. And you've got so many other courses that are doing everything exactly the same. So at least one course is a little bit different, doing hands-on engagement and doing things, learning by doing. So some students appreciate this. Not everybody, I would say there's always 20-30% of students that this tends to backfire. But overall, I think I've become better over time at aligning expectations, explaining things in the ADRA period. So others who seem to think that this is not their preference, they can shift. And the department allows me, so the courses that I have are either capstone, so they can choose other capstone, or an elective, so they can choose other electives. So it's not mandatory. They can always drop and move on to different classes with different instructors. So there is motivation, there is an alternative, and if you are willing to put in the work, there is also some reward for you in your future career, and of course the learning.
Yeah, I think it's nice that you mentioned earlier the PVL system. I also taught in the PVL system, and I think it's such a nice. You really captured, I think, the idea and applied it to such a nice context, in which students are not only like leading their own learning process, but also they make really actual contributions to science. And I think the next question that we got is about this, though. What do you think, in your view, is the role of the students' contributions to academic literature? Because this is somewhat new, especially in the system that we always think of the lecturer or the teacher knows all, and the students are there like to listen and learn. And I think one thing that we are all very interested in is what is the feedback that you get from students, and do they enjoy this process? Of course, it's intimidating, but like, what do they think about it?
Yeah, so I have lots to say about this, so I'll try and keep this short. I think during the process, a lot of pressure and tension, and students feel a big burden. And especially at the beginning, there's so much uncertainty. They have no clue what they're doing. And this is so different from anything else that they've done that this leads to some frustrations. But I think reflecting back, when I get some emails from students who have graduated or students that have continued to industry and academia, later on when I see them, I think many of these kind of reflect back on this as being a very meaningful part of their journey, for good or bad. You know, for some of them, it's like, oh my God, I thought science had everything figured out. I didn't understand that science is this messy. For others, it's like, I never imagined that I could have a contribution as an undergraduate. So a lot of the course is talking about how we empower students to take part in this process. One of the main things that I try to show is just how many mistakes professors make, and that everybody is is capable of contributing and helping us do better. So it really depends, a mixed bag, but overall I think that many of the students find this to be very meaningful, if not memorable, and that they've learned some very important skills at the end. So I think this is kind of like my aim and what I was really hoping for, and I think we've achieved that over the past years.
Right, and you mentioned that, I think a couple of slides ago, that like all the students are also co-authors in these publications that you get, right? So like you have several publications that started out as replications in classrooms, and there were some questions about how this authorship is attributed and agreed upon. For example, are there students that do not want to continue on this for the publication journey, or everyone that is involved in the classroom gets to be an author? How is this discussed and arranged?
Yeah, so this needed to be sorted out very early on, and we have a very strict model. So in my syllabus, there is a passage about what it means to take part in this course. Judgment, decision making, heuristics, and biases, I said default. So the default is everybody's a co-author. You can opt out if you make that clear at the beginning of the course. And in every submission, you need to reiterate this. And until now, 4 years, nobody has opted out of this. In addition, we don't want to have people being forced to this by omission. So we want to make sure that they understand the implications, which is why at the end of the ADRA period, at the second week, the students have to do a quiz on the syllabus. So you cannot start the course unless you've completed the quiz on the syllabus. It's not graded, but I go through this contract, sort of co-authorship contract together with them, to explain to them what is the model, and to explain to them that everything that they do is public, everything that they do is leading to a submission, and that we aim to, after they've graduated, they give us the permission for me and the lead author to, in their name, submit something, continue the work, and so on. So this is definitely very, very important to align these expectations and to have this both written out. And if they don't read the syllabus, to force this through, making sure that by doing something like a quiz, making sure that they've agreed to this, so that they read this and they confirm this, and then we move on. Generally, every student is a co-author. Not everybody contributed equally, but we do have credit contributorship, where we say what each one contributed. What did the students bring in? What did the teaching assistant bring in? What did the early career researcher bring in? And then my involvement in all of that. Sometimes I see reviewers pushing back and saying, you've done everything because students can't do this. And I'm like, actually, I did not. Just read the contributorship and you will see the students are the ones that did everything. I just, helped a little bit, guided here and there, but it's really they who deserve the credit. And there's a reason why they're shared first co-author together with the early career researchers. So it is collaborative work. Nobody's there just because they took my class and, sat back and they really did things. You cannot graduate this course without contributing. You cannot graduate this course without understanding science and really being involved in the actual application, in either the design or the analysis or the write-up. So it's very clear what every student is doing. Plus, because it's Google Docs, you can see every student, what they did in every section. Every step of the way, you can see what the students contributed and then what the early career researcher came in and did after that. Because everything is so open and transparent, there's no room for misunderstandings. You just need to structure this the right way. And I do believe that everybody deserves credit. In my PhD, I just remember a lot of interactions between students and professors where professors put themselves as first author and sometimes not even mention students. I don't understand how this is like a sustainable system. It's not fair, it's not equitable, it's not ethical. So we aim to really revamp this, and I think we really need to drive home the message that undergraduates, students, sometimes even high school students, everybody can have a contribution. Everybody can do science. There's nothing about me having a professor title that makes me more eligible for co-authorship than a student. So it does depend on what it is that you bring in, the process, the different skills. Even if you wrote a package or a function in R, still means that you should be cited, you should be included. So I believe in as much inclusion as possible, and it doesn't matter where you come from, what rank you are, how old you are. Everybody should be acknowledged and included in co-authorship.
Really nice. I hope we can follow this model because it's really, really nice. We now move on to one of our last questions about this the next initiative that you have as well, which is really nice because like sometimes we are afraid of people checking our work, and you do that again like in a very transparent way. So you have this Check Me, Replicate Me initiative where you encourage other researchers to check and replicate your own work. And I think I saw that you also incorporate this in your own courses, right? So like there are students that check your own work, and I think you also even reported like some mistakes that they found, and they are rewarded for these mistakes. Can you explain how this works?
Yeah, gladly. So the students do some really remarkable work. So not only do they do replications and extensions, but we also do assessments. So I started this in 2019 because I understood that before we do a replication, I think they need to see how others have done replications. So 2019, before they did replication and extension in the second month, in the first month, I just wanted them to go and have a look at many labs, open science collaboration, some of the published replications in perspectives and advanced methods in psychological science. So like the top replications that we have, I wanted the students to see what is the top-notch work in our field. And I wanted them to try and see if they can run the code, see the pre-registrations, if the actually what we consider to be top-notch is really the best, highest quality. And it's not always the case. Sometimes, especially with large collaborations, some things fall through the cracks. So the students were able to identify all sorts of things. And because of a few case studies that came out, one of which we were involved in, I realized that I really worry that in 10, 20 years, somebody is going to find an error that I've done now. And then 20 years, students, scholars, funding grants, millions of dollars, hundreds of hours are going to be wasted because of an error that I've done. This is partially why I open up everything. So I want others to be able to check this when reviewers go over stuff. I want them to be able to go over code. But if you've ever gone through peer review, you know that reviewers are, some of them invest, I don't know how, but they invest 2 hours in going over our manuscript. They've never opened the data in the code. They've never tried to run this. So we need something else. Some of the teams in the Netherlands have advocated for red teams. So I just decided, instead of paying red teams and trying to find scholars that are already very busy and don't have enough time, we have undergraduates who we can turn this into a learning opportunity. So 2019 was our first attempt. And then I went on Twitter and I gave some talks about this, and people are like, here's also a bias. Bias blind spot. You assume bias and inaccuracies in others. Why don't you check yourself? And I'm like, yeah, gosh, I should check myself. So 2020, we checked our replication reports from 2019. In 2021, we checked our replication reports from 2020. And, I was hoping, praying that on one side that they don't find mistakes, but on the other side, if there are mistakes, I really want them to find this so that before we publish this, that we actually know this. So you can go and have a look at the template and what that looks like. It's very, very detailed. It takes the students step by step, and you can go and have a look at their actual reports on what it is that they've done. And yeah, last year, following the case study of what happened, I did a section on my website where I said, if you find an error in my work, I will pay you $5 for a minor error, $50 for a major error. Even though it comes out of my own pocket, I find it to be very small money compared to the reputational and the heartache and the possibility of something like this happening to me in the future. And to my great surprise, the students have found mistakes. So I needed to pay them quite a bit of money. But then I offered them the opportunity. I said, so here's your money, but if you decide to donate this to charity, I will match this, one Hong Kong dollars to one Hong Kong dollar. Finally, they decided to donate this. So we donated $250 to give well, effective altruism, maximum impact. So win-win. Science wins, students win from their learning experience, charities win because they got a bit of money out of that. And just in general, the credibility of our work and us testing this process, I think is just like a big win for science and this replicate me, check me kind of direction. So I really hope I'm trying to promote this as a pledge that other people can also incorporate. One person so far has endorsed this and put this. I'm not the only one, so I've adopted this from others, like Stuart Ritchie, who wrote science fictions. So I'm hoping to see this more. This is just I want to show that some of the work that we've done has actually led to an expression of concern in one of the journals. So this is what led me to do this check me, replicate me, because 2021 students have found errors that could have been easily found with stat check, but the students are in this case led to an expression of concern. But the students, we also did a replication which was successful. So at first we identified some problems, but then we also showed that the effect is replicable and actually works out okay at the end. So big win for science as far as I'm concerned, and I hope that we'll be able to do more of that in the future.
Thank you. So I think we got the very last question for today. students and early career researchers are the key to this credibility revolution. That's a quote from the previous slide. I just read it on your slide. Any general advice for new researchers who want to be more transparent about the research, for educators, who want to implement open science?
Yeah, I have a lot of advice on this. So this is like, there's a link here to a workshop that I gave at HKUST this year on how to get started with open science. Actually, there's the Riot Club on YouTube has at least 6 talks about how early career researchers can get started. Just from our experience, I feel like the best way to do open science is just get started with this. So just like I put my stuff aside for a year, if you can manage that, great. If not, try and incorporate this in your work. If you can't free yourself, then choose a student, just like I did. Start doing this with a master's guided thesis student. Start doing this with a collaboration. Join a team that does this kind of thing. But I suggest start very, very simple and build up. So our first replication was the simplest possible, imaginable. So what Lucas Kutcher did back then in 2017 was really the simplest that can be run online. It's a scenario-based, very simple main effects, not even like an interaction. And then just run a replication. Try to do that replication as transparent as possible. In the HKUST workshop, I give a case study of, I went to SIPS, and in SIPS, Swedish lab said, can you come to Sweden to do kind of a workshop for us? And we came in, and within 3 days, we completed a replication that was finally published in Meta Psychology. So just do this. If you're too scared to do this, just invite me and I'll show you how to do this. So yeah, and I'm not the only one. Like, lots of people in my team are now doing this. I go around the world. Second semester of every year, I teach the first semester, and second semester I go around the world and try to help others to do replications. So start small, build up, try to do this with your students, try to free up as much as possible, or join a big team and see what you can learn from that. So yeah, join us, join an open science community, join a team, work with your students, start small, build up from that.
Thank you very much, Gilad. That was really fascinating, and I truly learned a lot. And I hope to incorporate in my work as well. But I really hope that many educators can follow your steps and have an easier time incorporating open science into their teaching and mentoring, because we all know it's not easy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication. So thank you very much for your patience and for your generosity with your time as well in answering so many questions. And I'm really sure this will be very inspiring to many people.
My pleasure. Just want to say that if anybody ever wants to follow up and talk about these things or need some guidance, advice, I would do my best to answer. And if I'm too busy, I'm going to connect with the rest of our team to give some advice. We're very eager to help, especially students and early career researchers, to help them in their open science journey. And everything that we do is open. You can go, you can have a look. If you can't find something, you can write to me and I'll show you where it is. Just take as much as you can, ask as many questions as you can, so that you can do better in your own journey to grow and promote and endorse open science.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.